2.4 The Pivotal Mechanism. An article in the Davis Enterprise, the local newspaper in Davis, California, on January 12, 2001, started with the following paragraph. By consensus, the Davis City Council agreed Wednesday to order a community-wide public opinion poll to gauge how much Davis residents would be willing to pay for a park tax and a public safety tax. Opinion polls of this type are worthwhile only if they are reasons to believe that the people who are interviewed will respond honestly. But will they? If I would like more parks, and I believe that the final tax I will have to pay is independent of the amount I state in the interview, I would have an incentive to overstate my willingness to pay, hoping to swing the decision towards building a new park. On the other hand, if I fear that the final tax will be affected by the amount I report, then I might have an incentive to understate my willingness to pay. The pivotal mechanism, or Clark mechanism, is a game designed to give the participants an incentive to report their true willingness to pay. A public project, say to build a park, is under consideration. The cost of the project is $capital C. There are individuals in the community. If the project is carried out, individual I, open parentheses, I equals 1 through n, close parentheses, will have to pay lowercase c sub I, open parentheses, with c sub 1 plus c sub 2 through c sub n equals capital C, close parentheses. These amounts are specified as part of the project. Note that we allow for the possibility that some individuals might have to contribute a larger share of the total cost, capital C, than others, e.g. because they live closer to the projected park and would therefore benefit more from it. Individual I has an initial wealth of $M bar sub I greater than 0. If the project is carried out, individual I receives benefits from it that she considers equivalent to receiving $V sub I. Note that for some individual I, V sub I could be negative. That is, the individual could be harmed by the project, e.g. because she likes peace and quiet, and a park close to her home would bring extra traffic and noise. We assume that individual I has the following utility of wealth function. Capital U sub I, open, open parentheses, $M, close parentheses, equals the set of M if the project is not carried out, and M plus V sub I if the project is carried out. The socially efficient decision is to carry out the project if and only if the sum of V sub I from I equals 1 to n is greater than capital C. Recall that capital sigma is the summation sign, and V sub I The sum of v sub I from I equals 1 to n is a shorthand for v sub 1 plus v sub 2 through v sub n. For example, suppose n equals 2. M bar sub 1 equals 50. M bar sub 2 equals 60. V sub 1 equals 19. V sub 2 equals negative 15. C equals 6. Capital C equals 6. C sub 1 equals 6. C sub 2 equals 0. In this case, the sum of V sub I from I equals 1 to n equals 19 minus 15 equals 4 is less than capital C equals 6. Hence, the project should not be carried out. To see this, consider the following table. We have utility of individual 1 is 50 if the project is not carried out. If the project is carried out, utility of individual 1 is 50 plus 19 minus 6 equals 63. Utility of individual 2 is 60 if the project is not carried out. If the project is carried out, the utility of individual 2 is 60 minus 15 equals 45. If the project is carried out, individual 1 has a utility gain of 13, while individual 2 has a utility loss of 15. Since the loss is greater than the gain, we have a Pareto inefficient situation. Individual 2 could propose the following alternative to individual 1. Let us not carry out the project, and I will pay you $14. Then individual 1's wealth and utility would be 50 plus 14 equals 64. And individual 2's wealth and utility would be 60 minus 14 equals 46, and thus they would both be better off. Thus, Pareto efficiency requires that the project be carried out if and only if the sum of V sub I from I equals 1 to n is greater than capital C. This would be a simple decision for the government if it knew the V sub i's, but typically these values are private information to the individuals. Can the government find a way to induce the individuals to reveal their true valuations? It seems that in general the answer is no. Those who gain from the project would have an incentive to overstate their potential gains, while those who suffer would have an incentive to overstate their potential losses. Influenced by Vickrey's work on second price auctions, Clark suggested the following procedure or game. Each individual I is asked to submit a number W sub I, which will be interpreted as the gross benefit if positive or harm if negative. That individual I associates with the project. Note that in principle, individual I can lie and report a value W sub I, which is different from the true value V sub I. Then the decision will be carry out the project as the set yes if the sum of W sub J from J equals 1 to N is greater than capital C, and know if the sum of W sub j from j equals 1 to n is less than or equal to capital C. However, this is not the end of the story. Each individual will be classified as either not pivotal or pivotal. Individual I is not pivotal if the set of either open parentheses W sub j, the sum of W sub j from j equals 1 to n is greater than capital C, and the sum of W sub j where j not equal to I is greater than the sum of C sub j where j is not equal to I. And or open parentheses W sub j, the sum of W sub j where j equals 1 to n is less than or equal to capital C, and the sum of W sub j from where j not equal to I is less than or equal to the sum of C sub j where j not equal to I. And she is pivotal otherwise. In other words, individual I is pivotal if the decision about the project that would be made in the restricted society resulting from removing individual I is different from the decision that is made when she is included. If an individual is not pivotal, then she has to pay no taxes. If individual I is pivotal, then she has to pay a tax in the amount of the absolute value of the sum of W sub j, where j is not equal to I, minus the sum of C sub j, where j not equal to I. That is the absolute value of the sum of W sub j from j not equal to I minus the sum of C sub j, where j is not equal to I. Recall that the absolute value of A is equal to A if A is positive and to negative A if A is negative. For instance, the absolute value of 4 is equal to 4, and absolute value of negative 4 equals negative times negative 4 equals 4. For example, let n equals 3, C equals 10, capital C equals 10, C sub 1 equals 3, C sub 2 equals 2, C sub 3 equals 5. Suppose that they state the following benefits or losses, which may or may not be the true ones. W sub 1 equals negative 1, W sub 2 equals 8, W sub 3 equals 3. Then the sum of W sub I from I equals 1 to 3 equals 10, which equals capital C. Thus, the project will not be carried out. Who is pivotal? The answer is provided in figure 2.1. 2.11. Figure 2.11 is an example of a pivotal mechanism. Individual 1 including I, or the sum for individual 1, the sum of W sub j including I is 10. For individual 1, the sum of C sub j including I is 10. Decision is no. The sum of W sub j, where j not equal to I without I, for individual 1 is 8 plus 3 equals 11. The sum of C sub j, where j not equal to I without I, for individual 1 is 2 plus 5 equals 7. The decision is yes. Pivotal, yes. Tax is 11 minus 7 equals 4. For individual 2, the sum of W sub j, including I, is 10. The sum of C sub j, including I, is 10. Decision, no. The sum of W sub j, where j not equal to I without I, is negative 1 plus 3 equals 2 for individual 2. The sum of C sub j, where j not equal to I without I, is 3 plus 5 equals 8. Decision, no. Pivotal, no. Tax, 0. For individual 3, the sum of W sub j is 10. The sum of C sub j is 10. Decision, no. The sum of W sub j, where j not equal to I without I, is negative 1 plus 8 equals 7. The sum of C sub j, where j not equal to I without I, is 3 plus 2 equals 5. Decision, yes. Pivotal, yes. Tax is 7 minus 5 equals 2. It may seem that since it involves paying a tax, being pivotal is a bad thing, and one should try to avoid it. It is certainly possible for individual I to make sure that she is not pivotal. All she has to do is to report W sub I equals C sub I. In fact, if the sum of W sub j, where j not equal to I, is greater than C sub j, where j is not equal to I, then adding C sub I to both sides yields W sub j, the sum of W sub j, where j equals 1 to n, is greater than capital C. And if the sum of W sub j, where j is not equal to I, is less than or equal to the sum of C sub j, where j is not equal to I, then adding C sub I to both sides yields the sum of W sub j, where j equals 1 to n, is less than or equal to capital C. It is not true, however, that it is best to avoid being pivotal. The following example shows that one can gain by being truthful even if it involves being pivotal and thus having to pay a tax. Let n equals 4, capital C equals 15, C sub 1 equals 5, C sub 2 equals 0, C sub 3 equals 5, and C sub 4 equals 5. Suppose that m bar sub 1 equals 40 and v sub 1 equals 25. Imagine that you are individual 1 and for whatever reason you expect the following reports by the other individuals. W2 equals W sub 2 equals negative 40, W sub 3 equals 15, and W sub 4 equals 20. If you report W sub 1 equals C sub 1 equals 5, then you ensure that you are not pivotal. In this case, the sum of W sub j, where j equals 1 to 4, equals 5 minus 40 plus 15 plus 20 equals 0 is less than capital C equals 15. Thus, the project is not carried out and your utility is equal to m bar sub 1 equals 40. If you report truthfully, that is, you report W sub 1 equals V sub 1 equals 25, then the sum of W sub j from j equals 1 to 4 equals 25 minus 40 minus, plus 15 plus 20 equals 20 greater than capital C equals 15. And the project is carried out. Furthermore, you are pivotal and have to pay a tax T sub 1 equal to the absolute value of the sum of W sub j from j equals 2 to 4 minus the sum of C sub j from j equals 2 to 4, which equals the absolute value of open parentheses negative 40 plus 15 plus 20 close parentheses minus open parentheses 0 plus 5 plus 5 close parentheses equals the absolute value of negative 15, which equals 15. And your utility will be m bar sub 1 plus v sub 1 equals c sub 1 minus t sub 1 equals 40 plus 25 minus 5 minus 15 equals 45. Hence, you are better off. Indeed, the following theorem states that no individual can ever gain by lying. The proof of Theorem 2.4.1 is given in section 2.8. Theorem 2.4.1, Clark, 1971, in the pivotal mechanism under the assumed preferences, truthful revelation, that is stating W sub I equals V sub I, is a weakly dominant strategy for every player I. Test your understanding of the concepts introduced in this section by going through the exercises in section 2.9.4 at the end of this chapter.